Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, I think everybody knows, but we're really excited about it. Tonight is Operation Christmas Child Packing Party. We're ready for it. And to celebrate, the songs this morning are going to be childhood favorites. So if everybody could stand up with us. And of course, the words will be behind us. The next song we're going to be doing is number 438 in your books. It's called Jesus Saves.
Jesus saves.
not in your books. Grace found this one in her collection. It's called Win the Lost at Any Cost. Kids, you can go down to your classes. Everybody else can have a seat.
Thank you, Lord, for this Lord's Day. We thank you, Lord, for your love and your mercy and your grace. We thank you, Lord, for this provision for our lives. Just pray now as we take the offering, Lord, help us to use it wisely to further the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We ask in his name.
All these pieces, broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, take our failure, you take our weakness. You set your treasure in jars of clay. So take this heart, Lord, I'll be your vessel, the world to see your life in me. Oh, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, well, I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life.
You probably know that our pastor is in Ecuador. He's checking on David and Cindy Jenkins for the churches. It was something assigned to him, I think several years ago, but it's his turn to go and check on them. So we have a privilege to have Scott Bruns here from Soda Hills to minister to us, and he brought his wife with him too. And so that added extra. So if you didn't know, all the good food that you eat out at the camp, Pam has a lot to do with that, and she's leading that here, just departing from that. Still going to have great food though, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. But that's just a small part of what they do out there. The love, the care, their heart. It's just, and I'm going to tell you a small story. I'm going to embarrass my grandson who's looking at me going, no. We have an agreement we don't embarrass each other. I don't embarrass him. Not bad. And it kind of puts it in perspective of what I think and what people think of Scott. Several years ago, he was young, come back from camp. He was excited, as kids get from camp, they really do. And he come and he was talking about Scott. Scott this, Scott that, this is the camp, and I told him, and it was a small word, I said, well, why do Scott? And he looked at me, he says, you know Scott Bruns? perspective of what kids and how much they think of Scott and the things he's done and just the camp itself. So that story has stuck with me all the time. And I do know Scott Burns as a friend, and also as I've seen him, the things he does, he's real. So I'm going to turn that over. I'm not going to say any more. Scott, appreciate it.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. I was going to stay down here. Can you videotape my right ear?
That'll work.
Does that work? Just, you know Jesus? Wow, that's awesome. And it's good to be back. It's been about 5 or 6 years since we've been here. And thank you for inviting us back. We love our relationship with the local church. I want to thank you for your partnership and your prayers. And several of you are involved with the camp in a number of different ways and supporting ministries and volunteering, and we appreciate that so much. We're excited about what the Lord's doing. This is our 14th year at Scioto Hills. Hard to believe that. And Pam and I are privileged. This is our 40th year of ministry, 40th year of working with kids, 40th year of marriage, and our 40th year of being on our honeymoon. We love to tell people we're still on our honeymoon. That's why we have no money. But that's good. So we're glad to be here. I do want to give you just a little bit of a camp update before we look into the Word. Your camp's doing well. We rejoice in safety at the camp. We rejoice that we are growing in numbers. God has been blessing the camp there. And we're so thankful for our staff, our permanent staff. I learned a long time ago, if I surround myself with great people, they make me look good. And we've got a bunch of great people at the camp. We just added Michael and Caitlin Dow because Pam, it was thrust upon Pam about 8 years ago to become the food service director. And every night in the summer, last 3 or 4 years, she'd come home in tears, and we were rubbing her feet and her back, and she just said, I don't know how much longer I can do this. But working in the kitchen at a camp is like the second hardest job in the world, next to being a coal mine. So, I don't know, but she did a great job for us, and we knew that we needed to replace her. And God graced us with Michael and Caitlin Dow. Caitlin, when she was a younger girl, grew up at the camp and wrote in her journal, my dream job someday is to be the cook at Scioto Hills Camp. And we're excited that we brought them in May. And we're also excited, and yet we're not as excited because we just found out this week that she is pregnant and expecting a baby in the middle of summer. So it's hard to run the kitchen when you're in the hospital with labor pains, right? So you pray for us, so we're excited for them. And she's more sick than anyone I've seen right now that's been expecting. But we pray for them as they manage that, as we plan to get around that here for this summer. If any of you love kitchen work, then let us know. We may put you to work for a little bit. So we're rejoicing in that. We're planning for 2020. We just decided we're going to be studying the book of Philippians this next year. Looking to put things together for the future, starting to recruit summer staff. We've already had interviews for that, and hoping that our numbers will continue to fill up. We're about full with our numbers, and so I'm praying for at least 50 more campers this next year for the summer. But we also, we do these year-round things. We've got Christmas at camp coming up here December 5th and 6th. Ben and Noelle Kilgore. We've not met them, but I called to see if I could get Point of Grace to come for Christmas, but they were booked, and then their friends, Ben and Noelle Kilgore from Tulsa, Oklahoma, will be our special music for the Christmas camp banquets on Friday and Saturday. Unfortunately, Pam and I will be up in New Albany in Columbus because I'll be having a hip replacement that day on December 6th. And it's a cool story about how the Lord worked that out. I'm actually having it done for free, which usually just doesn't happen. That's the only day they do it for free, and so I didn't want to turn them down. But we'll have that done on December 6th. Recharge, if you're in your 20s or 30s, a new event that we started last year for those married or single that still want to come back to camp and be part of that. And we do want you to pray for some things here. We're still trying to purchase this land. We believe the Lord wants us to build a new entrance to the camp. We have one piece of land. We're trying to buy a second piece and build the road on, and we are close to that. The surveyor just told me yesterday or Friday that he thinks they'll be done with the survey, get it to our lawyer, get it filed, and send it to the contract to the landowner, and hopefully by Christmas we'll be able to purchase this new land we've been working on since 2015. So we're hoping for that to take place. And then the last thing here, we just got word that one of our sister camps, Skyview Ranch, up in Holmes County, Millersburg. We were just there for a camp conference, 20 camps, 150 people. We just left on Thursday, and they woke up today to find their dining hall burned down. And we don't know the details. No one, by God's grace, has been injured. But the dining hall, if you've been to Skyview, the dining hall is their chapel. It's their main meeting area, their conference room, all of their offices, their greeting center. Everything is in that one building. And I know they still had a mortgage on the building. And they've just gone through the ringer with a number of things here. So pray for Skyview as they move forward and hopefully be able to give the Lord glory for that. Back in 1987, our dining hall at Scioto Hills burned down. Maybe some of you remember that. But the good comes from ashes because God's good. All right. John chapter 6 is where we're going to start today. And we're going to use the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, both from John 6 and Mark 8. And the idea is this. I've entitled the message, The Faith Test. And the theme would be that we need to learn how to place the full weight of our life in Christ. Faith has to do with placing the full weight of our life in Christ. And at camp, we talk about trust falls. We do trust falls. We have high ropes. We have low ropes. Low ropes are more for team building. But the high ropes are a great lesson, a metaphor in life about trusting God with regard to placing your faith in something that's beyond your control, right? And so years ago, South Webster Darcy brought the girls' volleyball team out, and they were doing our screen pole, where the girls climb one pole, they're harnessed in, they have to figure out how to stand on top of the one pole and then actually trust the rope enough to do a broad jump to try to go out, reach and catch the trapeze swing that is out a little bit from the pole that they're standing on. And if they don't catch it, then they will be belayed down to the ground. But it's quite intense, called the extreme. I've never done it, don't want to do it, can't do it. But we say that for high school and college students. So anyway, this one freshman girl is up there, and her legs are shaking, and she can't figure it out. The girls are down below cheering, "You can do it, you can do it." And she gets up there, she finally, you can just see her muscles are shaking, and they just say, "You gotta jump, you gotta jump." And so finally, after 20 minutes, and she's exhausted, she finally steps off and jumps and is safely brought to the ground. And girls all run around her and hugging her and doing what they did. And so afterwards, our program guy we're standing there, and he just says, what do you learn from this? And one of the girls said, "You've got to trust that rope like you trust Jesus with your life." Right? Placing the full weight of your life on Christ. And the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000, help us with that. Here's the question I want to start us with. And here it is. What is the one thing in your life that you believe that God can get you through, and yet you struggle to allow Him to have control of? What's the one thing in your life that you know God can get you through, that you're trusting Him for, you believe He can do it, you're trusting and claiming His word, but yet you still struggle to give God control over? And me, just to be honest, it's the money at the camp. There's always this thing hovering over me, the finances of the camp. And to know, and I've seen it over and over, I'm going to tell you a story a little later, but I've seen it over and over again, how God has met the needs of the camp in a number of different ways. And yet, when He does that, I find myself oftentimes surprised. I find myself forgetting that He's done it before, and forgetting to trust Him that He'll do it again in the future. All right? So with that said, let's look at John chapter 6 here, and we're just going to go through and give you some ideas. So this is going to be part 1 of the story, and we're going to transition to part 2, and then we've got an application conclusion as well. So John chapter 6, let me just read and make a few comments here. After this, after what? After Jesus began His public ministry, He's called His disciples, He's already done all kinds of different things to demonstrate and show that He is who He said He is. He's the Son of God, He's the person of God, He is God in the flesh, and He's come. And so after this, we can say that the disciples had been with Him long enough to see what He could do. They've been with Him long enough. So after this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is in the Sea of Tiberias, and a large crowd was following Him because they saw the signs that He was doing on the sick. So not only did the disciples see it, a bunch of people were seeing, and of course He was doing amazing things, and this crowd just growing. And the narrative is He's going back and forth around the Sea of Galilee. Had come up from Nazareth, gone up to Jerusalem, which is actually in the south. But they said it was up because they went up a hill. He's going back now. He's up in the northern part of these cities, Capernaum, Bethsaida, other places up in the Sea of Galilee, doing this ministry. And crowds are following Him because of what He's doing. So Jesus then went up on the mountain. There He sat down with His disciples and a bunch of people. Now the Passover, the Feast of the Jews, was at hand. So it's close. It's probably, this might even be maybe Friday morning. Lifting up His eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward Him, Jesus said to Philip, so now the test is going to begin. Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? He said this to test Him, for He Himself knew what He would do. Philip answered Him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. So I want you to see a few things here. First of all, Jesus already knows what He's going to do, and He is testing Philip with regard to his faith in Christ, right? And so, first of all, you have this idea of what we can't do. When the faith test comes to the part we can't do. They couldn't feed the people. Philip does the math. And he says, wait, 200 days' wages. And did some research on that. But a loaf of bread could be bought like a penny, and they would make the equivalent of like 300 pennies a day. And so you have 200 wages, 200 days' wages times 300. And even if they could buy all that bread, Philip does the math, it won't work. We just give everybody a bite. Because there's not 5,000 there, there's probably 20,000 there, right? So we begin by saying there's things that we can't do. We cannot do certain things, right? But then there's things that Jesus can do, and we know that he asked him the question because he already knew what he was going to do. He just wanted to test Philip's faith, right? So, Philip fails the test. Buy him some bread. Again, he's with Jesus. He's already seen what he's done. In Matthew's account, chapter 13, tells us that he's been healing the lame and the blind and the sick and the dumb and all that already. So, where are we going to get this bread? Well, just go buy. Well, we can't do that. So, Philip fails the test. Because he can't do it, he can't figure it out. He forgets that Jesus can do it. So verse 8, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Oh, well, Andrew's going to step up, and Andrew's going to make the difference, and he's going to be the one who passed the test. And he says, well, I know there's a lot of people, but all we've got are 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? And if he would have finished there, and he would have said, Jesus, just change it, man. Take care of the problem. We know you can do it. But instead, he says, what are they for so many? Andrew fails the test. Jesus said, have the people sit down. So you have what we can't do. We can't feed 5,000 unless we've got like a Kroger in our backyard, right? Jesus can feed 5,000 even if he doesn't have anything. And he tells us what we can do. What we can't do, what he can do, and what we can do. He tells them to have the people sit down. They can obey. Right? They can be obedient to his word. And there's just so much we could say about that whole idea. Even the old hymn, trust and obey, right? We can trust him for what he says, and we can obey what he says and tells us to do. So now here, verse 10, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so that the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. I want to interject here, because it's kind of cool, some of the history that's not in the text that first century readers would have understood. How did they know there's 5,000 men? Well, Mark tells us in chapter 6 that they broke into groups of 50 and 100. And you think, why did they do that? Or how would they even know? Well, the disciples went through in all these groups of 50 or 100. They could calculate how many people were there because they broke them into those groups. And here's what happened. Evidently, Jewish tradition had a few things going on with regard to blessing. When God blessed with a meal, a few things happened. One, they would tear off a piece of the bread and set it aside. No matter how much food they had, they were commanded in Deuteronomy to tear off a portion of the bread for the priest. That's one element. And if there was a small group, they were going to give a blessing for the meal. If there was 10 people, they said just a few words. We bless you, Lord. If there were 100 people, the prayer was longer. We bless you, Lord, our God. And if there were 1,000 people and they prayed, they said a longer prayer. We bless you, Lord, our God, the Savior of all men, or the God of Israel. So it's interesting that in their tradition, they had these rituals that are connected to how they respond to God's blessing. And so they were divided into groups, and so they could easily figure out that there were 5,000 men from the groups that were divided. Just an interesting side note, which is going to come up in a minute again with the parts they tore off to save for the priests. All right, so verse 11. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. Go back to verse 8. There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? He created he miraculously fed 20,000 people, so they didn't just get a meal, they got all they wanted. It was a bread and fish buffet, in a sense, right? So we get this idea that Christ is amazing, that Christ's ability is inexhaustible. And unfortunately, most of us grew up hearing that this was a story about a little nice boy that gave his fish and loaves to the disciples. Right? It's unfortunate. Because it's not about a little boy who gave his fish and loaves, because they probably took the bread and the fish from him, and he was just there and had no choice. It's about the greatness of Christ. Right? And there's a picture in it as well of all the stories. Every one of the pictures point us to the cross. That with God, everything's possible. With us, it's impossible. We can't save ourselves. We can't deal with our own sin issue. We cannot possibly meet our own need, and yet Christ meets the need. It's about his greatness. Everything points to the cross. Everything points to the gospel. So verse 12, and when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. Why? He wanted them to see that there was extra, but probably these people set aside a chunk of the bread to give to the priests. And if it was in their local town, they would have taken the food to the priest. And in this case, they would have taken the baskets full to the temple to give to the priests that were serving in the temple. There's a reason why there's extra. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. The word baskets here is the basket, is the word that is used for a beggar's purse. A beggar, what a beggar would do when he sat outside the temple, he would have a small basket for alms. Wasn't a very big basket, and they filled 12 of those. That's going to be significant in a minute. Verse 14. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. And all of a sudden there's this like rave going on, and we've got to make Jesus king right now. Right? So verse 13, perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force, wow, not to kill him, but to make him king. This is the guy they wanted in charge. If he could do this, they would never go hungry again. Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. He sent the people away. The other texts tell us they were filled and satisfied. He sends the disciples in the boat, and he goes to a mountain by himself. We're not going to take time, but the story goes on to say that he sent them across, and the sea begins to, they're in a boat, they go across the Sea of Galilee, and the winds and the waves come up, and they're freaking out from it. And here Jesus walks on the water to them. It's the same account, not here, but in Matthew's account where Peter gets out of the boat, and Lord, if that's true, let me come walk to you. And Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's me. They thought it was this ghost. All this stuff is happening. Jesus is walking on water, gets in the boat, and he tells the wind and the waves to stop. And they say, oh my word, this is God. Right? And he says to them, in the Matthew account, why do you doubt? Look at what I've done. Right? So faith is placing the full weight of our life in Christ. And yet we, like them, struggle, even though we've seen his evidence of verification that he's our God and he takes care of us. Now, let's switch to chapter 2. Go to Mark chapter 8. It's interesting that not all the miracles are recorded in every one of the Gospels, but the feeding of the 5,000 is. The feeding of the 4,000 is only in Matthew and Mark. So, chapter 2 now. So we've had the feeding of the 5,000. You've got this lesson about who God is. It's not about a little boy. It's about Christ's greatness and meeting needs. He sends them on their way. He comes to them walking on water. He speaks to the weather, and the weather changes. And at that moment, they say, "You are the Son of God." Peter is even able to walk on water based on his faith, and then he takes his eyes off Jesus. We know that, right? So I think then this is up in the upper part of the Sea of Galilee. They're going back and they stay close to the shore. You didn't want to go in the middle of the lake because it's dangerous and it was dark and they didn't have like Coleman lanterns and stuff, right? So they stayed close to the shore everywhere they went. And so they're moving back from Capernaum to Bethsaida, to Capernaum to Gennesaret or something like that. All these different towns, Dalmanutha or something like that. I don't even know the names of them. They're moving back, and then this crowd keeps hanging with Jesus. I tend to think that when the feeding of the 4,000 happens here, we'll see it in chapter 8 of Mark, that it's probably right on the heels of the feeding of the 5,000. They fed, they were full, but now 3 or 4 days have passed. In fact, it says 3 days, and they haven't eaten in 3 days. Because they're just hanging with Jesus to see what's going on. So, look at chapter 8, Mark. This is part 2 now. And you'll see how this all comes together in a few moments. In those days, in what days? Well, you just go back. His teaching, he walked on water, he heals the Syrophoenician woman, he heals a deaf man. All this different stuff is going on. It was in those days that he fed the 5,000, and these crowds are following him. So here, when again, in those days, when again, this is the English Standard Version, a great crowd had gathered. He sent them away. They were full. But man, they were going back to see what else was going to go on. So a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat. He, Jesus, calls his disciples to him, and he says to them, "I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away." There's something to say about the crowd's devotion here to Christ. There's something to say about someone willing to sacrifice the physical for the spiritual. Right? And we're pretty comfortable. We're really comfortable in America. Man, and if church isn't over by noon, you know, we're ranting and raving about not getting the lunch on time, right? In other places of the world, they just meet and they go all day. It may not, and so there's something to say about this. Matthew Henry, one of my favorite commentators, says this: "They who have a full soul may be content without slender provisions for their bodies." They who have a full soul may be content with slender provision for their bodies. Psalm 34:10 says, "Those that seek the Lord lack no good thing." So there's something to say about the crowd. And Jesus is recognizing their devotion, that they've been with him for 3 days. And at this point, whatever they had food-wise is gone. And there's something to say about his compassion on them in desiring to meet their need. But again, here we go, faith test number 2. He knows what he's going to do, right? But the same scenario. So verse 4, "And his disciples answered him, 'How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place?'" We're in a place where there's not even a grocery store. There's nowhere to even buy bread, so the question's a little bit different. So it goes back again to the faith test, what we can't do. There's a part in our faith where God understands and knows that, and we have to come to the place where we recognize we can't do it. But we have to recognize that Jesus can do it, right? So they do the math again. How in the world are we going to feed this time 4,000 men, probably similar 18,000 people or so? Just do the math. We don't even have if we had the money, well, we don't even have bread available close by to feed them. So they fail the test again. And again, I remind you that with God, everything is possible. With man, things that are impossible can happen. And I just remind you that you were saved by grace. You were saved by something you couldn't do, couldn't earn, couldn't be good enough, couldn't be spiritual enough, couldn't work hard enough, right? You cannot save yourself. And then here comes the rescuer, Jesus, who can do it and does. So, verse 5. It's interesting. Jesus says to them, how many loaves do you have? Interesting that maybe they were checking out I remember the little boy, and they got that, so maybe one of them must have grabbed some bread, and they said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down. There it is again, what we can do. We can't feed thousands without having a Kroger by, but we can trust Jesus who can do it, and there are things we can do. We can be obedient. And here again, they're directing the audience to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, very significant, he does that in both places. He thanks the Lord for his blessing. Tradition says that they typically put the meal in front of them, and they ate the meal, and after they were done, that's when they thanked the Lord. It's interesting that he does it before he eats, and so now 2,000 years of church history has the tradition of us praying before we eat. Just interesting. Maybe we should pray before, and if it's really good, pray again afterwards, right? Thank him twice for it. All right, so here we go. Having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the crowd, and they had a few small fish. And you say, well, why is it bread and fish? Well, it's probably dried sardines and bread, because bread could last a little bit. That was their staple. And dried fish, they had to dry everything that they ate because it would spoil. And that would have been a typical lunch. That was like their Lunchable back in the day. Whole wheat bread and sardines. Send that with your kids this week and say, hey, why don't you just think about Jesus today? But send a fruit snack too, that'd be okay. But it would have to be a fig, I guess. All right, here we go. And having blessed them, he set them, set before them, verse 8, and they ate and were satisfied. Again, filled. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. This word is a different word. The other one was a beggar's basket. This is a merchant's basket. This is the same basket that Paul, as the word is used when Paul was let down outside the wall. So it says a big basket. And so there's 7 baskets full. Why? For the priests. And to show that I'm not going to just meet your need, I'm going to go beyond and meet your need. And there was about 4,000 people, and he sent them away, and immediately he got into the boat and with his disciples, and he went to the district of Dalmanutha. And Dalmanutha is across the Sea Galilee, on the east side, and probably on the west side at this point. So, we said all that to get to this conclusion part. So you've got this wonderful, incredible experience of witnessing the greatness of God versus the impossible. And the people thinking in human terms and seeing that with them, they cannot get this done. But they see this wonderful thing take place, right? So God, just remember that God uses our doubts to magnify Christ. The disciples said, I believe, help my unbelief, right? We struggle. Paul struggled with it. God uses our doubts to magnify Christ. Our prayer for Skyview is that Christ will be magnified in this tragedy of losing their dining hall. So he's in the boat, he goes across, the Pharisees, the crowds are still going, the Pharisees are watching this thing, they've seen different things go on. They greet him on shore. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, not to verify who he is, but to catch him in a fault, to test him, to try to trip him up, because they're not buying this stuff. And while he's already given them incredible signs, earthly signs, they say somehow, we want a special message from heaven to verify. But it already had it. John the Baptist in the Jordan River, when Jesus was baptized, and they were there watching, and a voice from heaven says, this is my son. Boom. They'd already had the sign from heaven. They'd already seen evidence, earthly signs, over and over and over again. But they don't want to buy into it. They reject who he is. And so they're trying to catch Jesus in a mistake so that they can accuse him of not being who he claims to be. But Jesus doesn't give in to their demands. He denies their demand. And look at here, verse 12. And he sighed deeply in his spirit. It says, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. To you. You're not going to get it. In fact, it's Matthew that says, no sign will be given to you, this generation, except for the sign of Jonah. And we immediately go to Jonah being thrown in the sea, in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, and Jesus uses that illustration. He says, as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, so the Son of Man has to be in the earth. But what he's referring to is actually the Ninevites who heard the message, and at first they rejected the message, right? And then there are only a few of them that get saved in Nineveh. But the reference is to the comparison. Jonah's going with a message to proclaim. Most will reject it, some will receive it. And Jesus said, that's the only sign you're going to get. Some of these people are going to receive it, but you're going to reject it. Now, getting to the end here. Verse 14. I'm sorry, let's go back to verse 13. And he left them, he left the Pharisees. He got into the boat again with his disciples, and he went to the other side. So you just got this idea, this little boat going back and forth all over the Sea of Galilee. Gets in the boat, they're traveling. Now they had forgotten to bring bread. And they had only one loaf with them in the boat. I don't know if it was from him making it. I don't know if they had stopped somewhere. Someone was responsible. Maybe Judas, had it in his bag for lunch. I don't know. But they only have one loaf with them. And he cautioned them, saying, here's what Jesus says to the disciples. Think about this boat. Some of them rowing, going across the Sea of Galilee. And he just finishes this conflict with the Pharisees. And he says, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. What he's saying is, guys, you can't be proud. You can't be just ceremonial. This is not just religion. This is relationship. This is life change. You cannot be hypocritical. Watch out for the Pharisees who just show, and we know what he taught about that. And then he adds the leaven of Herod. I don't know where Herod had just killed John the Baptist a few weeks ahead of that. Watch out for someone who just wants to show, just want to see the miracles, just want to see the magic, but yet have no faith. And he calls it leaven because it influences, right? It influences, and be careful of that. Now, here's what's amazing. Verse 16. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. Wait. John, what? Didn't you bring bread? Peter, I thought you were bringing. No, Matthew, why didn't you? Well, Judas, Peter, what? Jesus is talking about bread. We don't have any bread with us. And so they start disputing, the other texts say. They start discussing who is supposed to bring bread. They miss the point. So look at this. And Jesus, aware of this, says to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not? It's like a V8 moment. Don't you get this? What in the world are you talking about bread for? Look at what he says. Do you not yet perceive or understand? Don't you get it? Are your hearts hardened? Look back, chapter 6. My Bible is just across the page. Look at verse 51. The word hardened here is rendered stupid. Are you being so stupid? Oh, that's a bad word. You're not supposed to say stupid. Proverbs says, I think it's chapter 14, he who rejects wisdom is stupid. Look at verse 51. Now, feeding the 5,000 just took place. They go across the sea. Jesus comes walking to them, calms the wind. Peter gets in the boat, starts to lose his faith. Verse 51, and he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astonished. Why? For they did not understand about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. They were rendered stupid. They didn't get it. Someone in front of them had met their need, had met the need of 20,000 people with just a few fish and bread. And they still were struggling to figure out who Christ was and what he could do. It's not a story about the little boy with his loaves and fish. It's a story about the incredible, inexhaustible power and magnification of Christ. So pick it up again. Chapter 8. Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes do you not see, and having ears do you not hear, and do you not remember? Sometimes our faith, the best thing we can do is ask ourselves questions. That's what Jesus is doing. The best thing to strengthen faith, he's just taking them, he's asking questions. And sometimes the best counsel we get is for people to ask us questions. When was the last time that you sensed the Spirit's work in your life? When was the last time you sensed the Spirit's conviction in your life? When was the last time that you sensed the Word of God being alive? And when was the last time God evident? All those things. We need to answer those questions. So that's what he's doing here. Why are you talking about bread? Don't you get it? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Look at chapter 8, verse 22. It's right there. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought them a blind man. What do? You heal the blind man. You have eyes, but you can't see? Every time you heal the blind man, it's a picture of spiritual blindness, and he opens their eyes to see the gospel. Every time. He does it physically, so that we can see the spiritual in it. And having ears, do you not hear? Look at chapter 7, verse 31. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon and to see Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. And there brought to him a man who was deaf. And he healed. Do you have ears and you can't hear? Every time he healed a deaf man, it's because there's a picture of us being spiritually deaf. And God has to open our ears to hear the gospel. God has to open our spiritually blind eyes to see the gospel. So any lame person, any person with leprosy. It's all a picture of spiritual deadness and the fact that we can't fix ourselves and Jesus does. So here we go, verse 19. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you take? And they say 12, right? All right. And the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they say to him, 7. And he says to them, do you not understand? Don't you get it? Don't you get who I am? Don't you get what I can do? Why in the world, if you see who I am and you see what I do and you know that my promise, why in the world would you not trust? Why in the world would you not depend? Right? And I'm so guilty of doubt, of failing the test, and yet he proves over and over who he is. And if you're like me, and you are, you probably say, yeah, right with you, doggone it. No need to. So just the last thing here, I want to flip to John chapter 1 real quick. I want you to see something here, and we'll be done. Grace. By God's grace, he saves us. By God's grace, he sustains us. By God's grace, he transforms us. By God's grace, he renews our mind. By God's grace, we are given the benefits and life that we enjoy. By God's grace, we have fellowship in him. By God's grace, we have our needs met. By God's grace, we have family. All by God's grace, right? There's a reason we sing, this is amazing grace. Look at what John the Apostle writes in verse 16, chapter 1. We'll pick up in verse 14. He's declaring the Word became flesh. Jesus is the Word. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So he's writing an account, and he includes the feeding of the 5,000 in his account. And in parentheses, John says John the Baptist is who he's referring to, bore witness about him and cried out, this is he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. John the Baptist declaring that Jesus is God. Then this statement, for from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. And literally it simply means one level of grace to the next level of grace. And what we can't do, Christ has done for us and continues to do, and it's all about experiencing one level of grace to the next, right? So what's that thing in your life that you know God can handle? You know he can take care of it, yet you still struggle to give him control over. I know what it is in my life. Things come and go, but I told you the main one in my life. And yet I've got to realize that there's things I can't do, but there's things that Jesus can do, and there's things that he wants me to do so that I can do those things and do my part and trust him. Trust and obey. There's no other way, right? So where are you at today with that? grace upon grace, to meet our need, to place the full weight of our life in Christ. Now, I got to finish. You okay with a story here? We've seen so many different ways God has demonstrated His blessing upon us at camp, so much so that we know we're not done. We know that He's still blessing the camp. We had housing issues. Some of you may have heard this story. When I came, we had 7 houses. We had 6 families and some single adults. And so we had enough housing. As time has gone by, we've added more families. We added a housekeeper and his wife. They got married, and honeymooners can sleep in a tent, right, or a log cabin. That's not very warm. But when you have babies, something changes, right? And so Douglas and Lacey had little Bella, and now we've got an issue because we were moving Douglas and Lacey all over 2 or 3 different places during the year, and now we couldn't do it. We have a housing need. And then we hired Michael and Caitlin Dow to help replace Pam and help us with maintenance, and we're short housing. So we have 9 families now in 7 houses. By God's grace, we discovered a closet in the back of Al's shop that had a bunch of stuff in it, and the closet was actually designed to be a bathroom. Didn't know that till like last year. Dan Edwards just happened to say, oh, by the way, there's a bathroom there. Really? Why don't you tell me that? Because we were like looking all over the place. So we built an apartment on the back of that shop. We only had to build 3 walls because we already had 1. We had electric, we had sewer, had water, all there. So we built an apartment that'll be appraised for around $90,000. We built it for $33,000 by God's grace. Volunteers, different things, special pricing from different items. God showing Himself faithful. So we're short 1 house still. So we're looking all over the place on what to do. If I rent off camp, which family do I make go off camp to live? And in the summer, they have to drive in the morning, drive home late at night. Who's the one who gets disconnected to the rest of us living together at the camp? And so when all my things were exhausted on what to do, and a lot of places weren't fit to live in, I just called our neighbor across the road. We only have like 2 houses across the road from us. 3. One of them is Gary Storm. And so you got 3. So the house sold 2 years ago, and we didn't know it. If we would have probably bought it back then. So I just called Tim. This is last March. Tim had bought it. I met him a few times. I said, Tim, hey, if you ever want to sell this house, we're interested in buying it. He said, this is a God thing. He said, I have cancer, can't live here anymore. I'm being transferred to the VA hospital in Cincinnati. He said, I want you to have the house, and I want to sell it to you for what I owe on it. So you start right there, you say, well, no one does that, right? If someone wants your house, why not make some profit? So the next day, $96,871.17. That was the buyout at the end of March. That was the price we were going to pay. So with the lawyer fees, we needed $98,000 to buy the house. So we had $40,000 that we could use because originally with this land purchase, we had an $89,000 gift, but the family wanted to keep part of it in the house, so we're now offering them $49,000. So instead of having to buy the whole thing, we have $40,000 left over. So we started with $40,000. We have someone who calls us and said, I've heard about your housing need. I want to give you $40,000 toward your housing need. Great. So now we're at $18,000. I'm driving. This is like a Tuesday. This whole thing is coming together on a weekend and a Monday. I'm driving to Sherwin-Williams on a Tuesday, and I get a phone call. So we need $18,000. Get a phone call from someone, and the lady says, hey, just want you to know, Scott, I'm sending a check to camp for $18,000. And she said, I was going to send it for $15,000, but I thought you needed $18,000. She didn't know about the story. So I was like, what? I'm crying, talking to her, So we get this thing together, and a few more things. We get a contract, we send it. His mom has power of attorney, he's ill. He has no will, she's got power of attorney. We send a contract, she signs it. She gives us a copy of the power of attorney. We take it on a Wednesday Afternoon, we take it to the lawyer. The lawyer calls us on Thursday and says, this won't work because the power of attorney's no good, we can't read it. You gotta find the original, or have him sign another one. Well, now, on Friday, he is being shipped to the VA hospital, and now he's in and out of consciousness on morphine, basically in hospice. Calling, the mom tries to find the papers, there's no paper to be found. So we write up new papers with our lawyer. We call the social services people at the VA hospital and said, hey, if Tim wakes up, we're going to send you some papers. Can you have him read those and sign? We're buying a house from him. He wants to do that. Can you have him take care of that? And she said, yes, but we won't do it unless his family's here. So that's a Friday, and his family was planning on coming on Tuesday. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, one, we have to pray that he stays alive. Otherwise, if he dies, the house goes into probate for a year, right? So who knows? Two, not only does he have to wake up, he has to be conscious and able to sign the papers while his mom and his brother are there. So we're like praying like crazy, right, in there. And that's what happens when you have needs, right? You pray more. That's what I do. And so I forget that Jesus takes care of us. So they get there about 10, and around 11 o'clock or so, he signs the papers. He wakes up. Yeah, I want to sell the house. Signs the papers. And we think Tim was a believer. So anyway, so now the guy who was going to give us $40,000 for the house, I call him because he said, tell me when to send the check. I call. He says, I can only send you $35,000 now for some reason. And so he sends the check. We're in the post office, we're at our mailbox sitting there. A few days later, get our mail. Sure enough, there's the check for $35,000. And so I turned to Pam and said, well, we're short $5,000. And so, we'll just maybe take it from savings. And so Pam's more spiritual than I am, and she says, well, let's see what happens. We didn't even move. We're same day, same pile of mail, looking through it, and there's a letter from a friend of ours that we figured out we hadn't heard from in 9 years from our church in Colorado. Played church league sports with him. He's a single guy. And tightwad, too. So we open the letter, and there's a note in there. It's from Ken, and he says, I've been wanting to do this for several months. Please accept this check for $5,000.
Amen.
My word. That's like close to a George Mueller orphanage story, right? But it's just another indicator that God is taking care of us. What we can't do, He can do, right? And there are things that He wants us to do that we can do. We can trust and we can obey. Father, thanks for today. Thank you for the folks here at Grace Baptist Church and for we recognize that church in Southern Ohio can be a difficult thing. There's so many traditions and so much religiosity going on and things, and we want to see growth. We want to see growth in our church, Wheelersburg, and the other churches here that are promoting your Son and the gospel. And we just pray for the people here that you would encourage them. Help them to trust you, knowing that you can take care of them and meet their need. Give us understanding. Give us the ability to live from one level of grace to the next. Give us the understanding to trust for the things we can't do, and yet to be faithful and obedient to things we can. And we'll be ready and quick to give you the glory for it. In Christ's name, amen. Last thing, just heard this. Dr. White was at a conference. Dr. White's the president of Cedarville, and he said this: God can do in 1 second what you cannot do in a lifetime. It's worth remembering that. God can do in 1 second what you can't get done in a lifetime. All right, we singing? Are we done? I don't know. Okay.
Never volunteer.
I'm sorry, I thought there was,
It's okay,
oh,
we got this.
you trust and obey words.
Yeah, that's what we decided on.
Yeah, great minds think alike.
What was it, Patty? Thank you. She's good. It's number 571 if you want to use your books.
5 what?
571.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.
I have a few announcements to make before you all leave, and then we'll depart. Of course, remember Rob and Becky as they're in Ecuador. Keep them in your prayers, and especially their family, and especially Sarah. Right, Sarah? Sarah's kind of the conductor here of the McKinney's.
Yeah, and yes.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, Helen.
Special shout out to Helen.
Pray for that whole situation with the kids, okay? Yeah, I believe. Don't forget tonight, we're packing boxes, so please be here 6 o'clock. Am I correct? 6? Okay, I've already messed up already, so it's 6 o'clock. And then next Sunday is anniversary Sunday. Plan to be here, and we're gonna have a potluck meal afterwards. So bring something good to eat. So I think that's it. Do we have any other announcements?